talk with us about this.
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I don't have a presentation together. I was just going to chat kind of informally with you guys about the guidelines. The WDFW are, well, first that we put out back in April of 2020, and then we are currently working on updating them. So as you all know, initially in 2020, when when SARS-CoV-2 was just kind of ramping up, and we at the time didn't know nearly as much about it as we do now, WDFW and a lot of our other state partners kind of put a hold on working with bats directly, just because at the time there was some concern that bats, North American bats, might be susceptible to SARS-CoV-2. Turns out that, at least based on some preliminary research currently published, but some research done with big browns, it looks like North American bats are not as susceptible to SARS-CoV-2 as we initially were concerned they might be. And so because of this, we are in the process of relaxing the guidelines that we have. So we're going to put forth some guidelines that do in fact allow bat work with handling bats directly. The recommendation is going to be to double mask and also wear a face shield if you are directly handling bats. There's a little bit of nuance in that, in that if you're, say, in a cave environment or an environment where you're swabbing the bat in place, but you're not actually handling the bat in hand, then we're not going to be requiring the face shield. But if you're actually holding the bat, up close and personal, kind of more in the sense of like breaking the CDC guidelines on the social distancing 6 to 12 feet distance, then we're going to be asking for that extra precaution to be taken. And again, I think we'll just be following the CDC guidelines when it comes to wearing the double mask. The CDC, I think it was yesterday or the day before, earlier this week, put out some pretty great guidelines on how to double mask, because there's some ways to do it and some ways not to do it that have been discovered from the ongoing research that looks at how masks actually protect from the transmission of SARS-CoV-2. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I really wanted to leave time for this group to give feedback or ask questions or just have a discussion with y'all from anything that you might, any questions you might have.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, there's a question from Chris. Does wearing just an N95 and face shield work rather than 2 cloth masks plus face shields?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And so that's the CDC guidelines regarding the N or KN95 masks, is if you're wearing, so those types of masks are made to fit like a respirator. They fit much more tightly. And the CDC guidelines say, basically your site claim, and it's true, that if you put a secondary mask on top of the KN or the N95s, that you may mess up that fit. So in those cases, just the N or KN95s are considered fine. They provide enough filtration anyways, and so they are better than just wearing a straight up surgical mask. So yes, in that case, yeah, a KN95 plus a face shield would be adequate.
And there's just a comment, if you could share that publication for the Big Brown Challenge on COVID, that would be great. You can drop that in the chat.
I can put that in the chat. Yeah, so, and I guess I can, if folks want, I can just give a quick synopsis of that paper. But they inoculated big browns and had, I think it was 4 different groups of bats paired. So two bats, inoculated one of the 2, and then monitored them for a period out of like 2 weeks before they euthanized them. And they found that the inoculated bats did not transmit SARS-CoV-2, and the bats that were partnered with the inoculated bats in the housing did not pick up SARS-CoV-2. So based on that, even with inoculation, it looks like the big browns are not susceptible at all to SARS-CoV-2. And they did it, they looked at histopathology after they sacrificed the bats, and they also did qPCR and attempted viral culture, and everything was negative. But I will drop the link to that paper in the chat box.
And Katie, do you know if the USGS plans to do other challenge tests with North American species?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that.
Katie, it's Greg.
Yep.
Hi.
Hey.
So at the last Western Bat Working Group board meeting, Matt, what's his last name? Or Nat, gave a presentation with slides that they shared, they sent out on email.
Mhm.
I think it would probably be fine to send that. I could check with them to just repost that on our Washington Bat Working Group so everybody could see it.
Mhm.
Well, of course it would be, because it went to everybody.
It was,
Mhm.
yeah, I went to the Western Bat Working Group, so I think that would be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that'd be great.
I was going to post the notes to that meeting too, or maybe the last 3 meetings that I haven't posted the minutes. So why don't I just do all that, make a commitment to do all that today or tomorrow. And it's the study that you're referring to. Yeah.
Right.
I
And I think I have some of those slides too, because they've been, and the CDC has a One Health working group that's a bunch of federal and state partners, and Jonathan Sleeman from the USGS lab has been providing updates. So I can also drop those CDC slides as well, or send them to you, Greg, and you can send them out. They may be the same.
Yes,
slides.
I don't know if these are unique or if these are recycled or.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll send them out, and if they look, you can say, you see if yours add anything to it. How's
That's
that?
great. That'd be great.
Super.
And Katie, do you mind just doing a really brief update on what that means for bat rehabbers?
Sure.
We
Yes.
tend to get a lot of questions on whether bats can go to rehabs or not.
Right. Yeah. So we are also updating our guidelines for wildlife rehabilitation in Washington. And within that, we are now relaxing some of the restrictions that we had on wildlife rehabilitation specifically for bats. And we are allowing bat rehabilitation kind of within the same approach that we took before, where it's like in the summertime, there are a lot more bat rehabilitators that can take in all bats. And then in the wintertime, we have restricted the intake of bats with possible white nose syndrome to just 2 facilities. So just to Paws and Happy Valley bats. So it's kind of still the same with enhanced biosecurity protocols and everything that goes along with dealing with white nose syndrome. But we are now allowing the release of bats. We have asked that wildlife rehabilitators that are releasing bats to let myself and Abby and Trisha, the biologist who oversees the permitting for wildlife rehabilitation for WDFW, just to let us know, mostly so that we can track when and where bats are released. And it's also when they let us know that they're getting ready to release a bat, we just send them a general set of questions that verifies that no rehabilitator has been in contact with a bat that might have clinical signs of COVID, just to make sure that those bats haven't been exposed to SARS-CoV-2. There's some ongoing discussion that at some point we may be able to sample bats that are being released for SARS-CoV-2. I would very much like to see us do that. But right now, the ability to test animals and wildlife specifically is really limited just because of testing supplies. And so because of that, we are just limiting our testing of wildlife to felids and mustelids and not bats at this time. But hopefully, as we move forward with all things SARS-CoV-2, testing will become more readily available. And at that point, we would very much like to include bats, because I'd like to get a whole bunch of negatives basically to add to the data and our understanding of COVID and bats.
I'll just throw out there real quick that I believe the National Health Center has now funding to do some surveillance for SARS-CoV-2 from guano samples that they collect through white nose syndrome sampling. So hopefully that'll provide some good information for us pretty soon.
Yeah, and that's great. And I know that they did some sampling of bats in California before they were released, and they were all negative.
There's a question about what would be the symptoms of COVID in bats.
That is a very good question. We, at this point, my understanding is, well, we don't know. Based on what we do know from other animals, some wild animals, but mostly felids and mustelids and canids, and some gorillas, the assumption would be it'd be very similar to humans, right? So based on what we know from other animals, about 50 to 65% of animals are also asymptomatic, kind of like humans are, which is, one of the difficulties in tracing this pandemic. But so either asymptomatic or respiratory symptoms. And then there's also some non-specific symptoms like GI issues. So basically what we've been saying for folks that work with wildlife considered potential high-risk taxa is when in doubt, let's test it. So if you have an animal that has respiratory signs or even GI issues, that it'd be worth getting that animal tested. So we're really basing what we think the symptoms will be off of what we know from humans and other animals that are infected with SARS-CoV-2.
Thanks, Katie.
Sure.
Katie Ramin, you have a question or comment?
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering, and this could go to the bat follow-up meeting if need be, but just what would be the guidance we should give to people with bat boxes on their property for biosecurity, both for white nose and COVID precautions? Are there any specific things that private citizens should do if they have active bat boxes?
Yeah, and I can touch on the COVID, and Abby, you want to do the white nose side? Yeah, so for COVID, I think that I basically just say to treat wildlife as we would a potentially high-risk grandparent, right? So if they can social distance from them, if they're coming in contact closer than 6 to 12 feet, to wear a mask, now a double mask, now that we know more about the highly transmissible new variant of SARS-CoV-2. So as far as bat boxes and on the in the environment and humans interacting with those, I think the risk is relatively low as long as they can social distance appropriately and be outside, which bat boxes are.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And then